the things I learned so well in my youth. I think I'm returning to those days when I was young enough to know the truth. Now there are no games to only pass the time. No more coloring books, no Christmas bells to chime. But thinking young and growing older is no sin. And I can play the game of life to win. I can recall a time.
That's me, aged about 8, trying hard to avoid the cameras. Just one frame from one spool of Chick Wright's collection of Super 8 home movies. Here they are, about 20 cans of them. A unique record of scouting over a 15-year period in the 60s and the 70s. Because in those days it seems wherever the Fourth went, whether it was to camp, to sea or abroad, Chick Wright's camera went with them. This is the group the way it was, though not perhaps as Baden-Powell might have envisaged. The history of the Fourth stretches back to the beginning of the last century, to the days when the Scout movement itself was in its infancy. A fresh, exciting experiment in youth leadership, conceived of by Baden-Powell on the Transveldt during the Boer War. It was an idea taken up and developed with energy and enthusiasm by Scout leaders in towns throughout the country. On the 13th of April 1913, it happened in Streatham. A small group of boys flying the Union flag marched to church at St Albans. There were no cameras to record the event. These pictures are from the early 60s, but the spectacle must have been very similar, excepting the boys' appearance. In those days, the Fourth were land scouts with big hats and wooden staves. Activities were of the traditional outdoor camping and pioneering variety. No one at that time in the Fourth was very interested in getting wet. The evolution of the group from land into Sea Scouts is where our story really begins, and is best told by the people who brought it about.
Towards the end of the war, we knew of some water sort of activities and boats and things at Putney, and a few of us went down there and made contact with the remains of another Sea Scout group. And we just started to experiment, and we so enjoyed it because it was, after all, it's scouting, but with the sort of water boating side attached to it. And everybody just so thoroughly enjoyed it. We actually formed a patrol in the 4th Streatham called Bulldog Patrol, and it was a Sea Scout patrol. And its logbooks still exist.
So famous became the exploits of the Bulldog Patrol that the rest of the Fourth sought to be part of the action. The movement now recognised specialist sea and air scout groups, and though based in London and 50 miles from the coast, the Fourth's leaders opted to take the plunge. Out went the green and beige, in came the navy and purple. And while Streatham and its headquarters in Pretoria Road continued to be the Fourth's official home, its weekend playground became the Thames at Putney. Now, playground may be the wrong word, because the Thames between Putney and Hammersmith Bridge is a wide, tidal and demanding river. A safe place to teach boating skills, given the right kind of supervision.
Putney was a fantastic place to boat. Each boat had someone, a patrol leader, who had quite built up their experience over the years. They thought they were just going out boating. In actual fact, I suppose whoever was rowing the boat and in charge of it, each learnt their lessons in life. They progressed up from just being the bowman to rowing and to eventually helming and getting the boat in and out of difficulties or wherever we wanted to go.
The Fourth's fast-growing fleet of canoes, dinghies and inflatables were appropriately stored inside the nearest licensed premises.
We had a boathouse underneath the Star and Garter pub, which was quite unique, I suppose, to have the bar so close. The boathouse, we used to keep the equipment in, and one very small dinghy that was bought with the idea that it could go out through the very small doors out onto the street, providing the tide wasn't too high, and we could get the boat out quite nicely.
At about this time, some of the more adventurous gig crews were encouraged to venture upstream. Timing was crucial to catch the tide.
You started to hit the shipping traffic on the river. So there's small oil tankers around, small merchant ships, and you're hitting the tide, which is running quite fast. But it actually did require much slicker boat handling skills.
Through Battersea, Vauxhall and Chelsea, past the Houses of Parliament, towards an objective symbolic of the Scouts' exploratory initiative.
There was Discovery and President, Chrysanthemum and Wellington. 4 boats all kind of on permanent moorings with mooring chains running down, which was the thing you had to do, was get the boat in between the mooring chains, or you were in you were in deep water.
Discovery, then moored beside the Thames at Temple Bar, wasn't only a base for leadership weekends. It was a pretty classy bolt hole in London's West End. Not a bad run ashore for those inclined to jump ship.
And I remember that the senior scouts, the older ones, they were allowed out a little bit later than we were, and we all had to be back in our hammocks by a certain time.
Scott's magnificent vessel was available to the Forth through its success in securing Admiralty recognition, a scheme which, dependent on annual inspections, opened the door to some superb naval resources.
Only 100 scout groups were allowed to be recognised in this country, and the Forth became one of them. A certain amount of equipment could be issued from the Navy. The other big facets of it, I think, is that it requires standards to be kept, and the annual inspection monitors sort of progress that everybody's getting on, gaining their progress awards, and the boating, achieving boating qualifications and standards afloat. So to me, it's this annual requirement to keep up a standard.
But the Forth was never just about square bashing and polishing shoes. There was a whole world out there to explore.
Thank you for the days, those endless days, those sacred days you gave me. I'm thinking of the days I won't forget a single day, believe me. I bless the light, I bless the light that lights on you, believe me. And though you're gone, you're with me every single day, believe me. Days I remember all my life, days when you can't see wrong from right. You took my life, but then I knew that very soon you'd leave me. But it's alright, now I'm not frightened of this world, believe me. I wish today would be tomorrow. The night is dark, it just brings sorrow, let it wait. Thank you for the day.
Days out and pioneering, the seaside, fun fairs, jumble sales, sports and dodgy transport. It was all part of being in the Forth, as was the camping and the bad weather. On dry land, the Forth standards were never quite as high. The group had always camped, but under canvas the emphasis was usually on fun rather than competence. Healthy outdoor activities combined with a reasonable level of comfort, and cooking politely described as basic. Hopes weren't high then when the annual ritual of the district camping competition came around.
Our performance was appalling. We couldn't whittle tent pegs. We couldn't cook that well, and the assessor actually looked at the state of our camping gear, of all our big billies, and said, these are not hygienic, these are not good enough. We're going to have a word with your scout leader. And we were kind of semi-jubilant and semi-totally embarrassed. We didn't win any camping competitions, I'm pretty sure. We did once make an oven, which we did pretty well with, but we certainly didn't figure on the Land Scout skills.
Summers were spent further afield. Pembroke in South Wales and Stoke Gabriel in Devon were the most popular locations. The generosity of local landowners gave the Forth some spectacular sights, instantly dappled in Stonehaven green within hours of the group's arrival. At Stoke Gabriel, on the Dart estuary, the Forth were in their element. The tradition of taking on local scouts at the Totnes Regatta dates back to around this time and is still a highlight of the group's year to day. There was also an opportunity for helming some of the finest sailing boats ever made.
Having two whalers, we could again take the entire troop out for the day. The cutter is 32 feet, carries a huge area of sail, and it's such a large vessel that at Stoke Gabriel, for instance, we could load the entire troop into a cutter and go out sailing for the day. It was big enough to do that. The whaler, 27 feet long, it's a bit lighter vessel, but more lively in the sense that it would, be a bit more sort of difficult to sail. But we could take perhaps half the troop at a time in one of those.
The next logical step was to cross the channel, not in a cutter, but on a ferry, as the Forth explored the alpine playgrounds of France, Austria and Germany.
I can't quite remember when these were started, these sort of continental trips, but I brought those in as a bit of a privilege because it was for the older dads. Maybe every couple of years, I think these used to take place, visiting all sorts of various countries. And the idea was that they were sort of pretty much reserved for patrol leaders or secondary, older boys in the troop anyway. You couldn't just go on these wonderful sort of jollies and miss the rest. To go on one of these, you had to have attended the 10-day troop camp with all the others, all the youngsters as well. And the formula of it seemed to me to work extremely well, because we did a number of those overseas trips. We visited many parts of Europe. And it was a kind of an extension of the basic camping.
Closer to home, the Forth gave boys the chance to experience the great outdoors with their most embarrassing of all family members, their dads.
Oh, Dad's camp. Yeah, I mean, that was a kind of an institution which I think was established in our time. I'm not sure they had it before. And we would go to Petersham, to the Petersham Sea Scout place, and they had a hut with a field beside it, and there was a short track down to the river. And I've got one really abiding memory of Dad's camp, which is a little bit self-indulgent, but I remember all the dads kind of standing around, and we were probably about 12 or so. And the Venture Scouts, or maybe they were called Senior Scouts then, I guess, set up various pioneering projects, including an aerial runway. And they sort of looked at their audience of adolescents and dads, and they did a full-on aerial runway, and they did a much more mild aerial runway. And my dad was the only dad who did the mega aerial runway. And that has got to be one of the moments when I was so proud. They were reliving their national service. And I think there was quite a lot of that involved in that they could talk about what they did during their period of national service as kind of late teenagers.
In 1967, the group threw itself into a new challenge. The National Scout Car races had already been held at seaside resorts around the country for a couple of years. Soapbox pedal cars of Heath Robinson design charging along the promenade at a breathtaking 20 miles an hour. The Fourth thought it could do better. Enter the Dragula.
We had the best cars. We were far in advance of any other, which were all Olswood and Plaster of Paris and everything. We had the best cars because we had a very ingenious inventor who actually produced two very good cars, which were years in front of their time.
To the scrutineers, it didn't look legal. No steering wheel and 15 gears.
It was super efficient because you're lying on your back and all your strength is going through your legs. We actually went in speeds in excess of 40 miles an hour, so we were very, very fast, but only in a straight line.
Poetry in motion, walking by my side, her lovely locomotion keeps my eyes open wide. Poetry in motion, see her gentle sway, all wave out on the ocean.
For 3 glorious years at Skegness, at Blackpool and here in Brighton, the Fourth's cars swept the board.
It was fantastic. There were huge crowds, something I didn't really expect. I didn't think that many people were actually going to watch a bunch of scouts on scout car races. On my first one, which I won at Brighton, I was given my prize by Paddy Hopkirk, who was the very famous racing driver at his time, and actually won several races, and it was on the main news. So it was a major thing.
Back at Putney, it had been an ambition of the Fourth to own and operate its own workboat on the river. The cost of buying such a vessel had always been well beyond the group's means. But in the late 60s, Jim Riddle, father of the then scout leader Keith, came up with a solution. Jim had managed to acquire an ex-ship's lifeboat, a massive steel-hulled shell of a craft seriously in need of an engine. That was to arrive in the second post, a 97 horsepower diesel unit from the Navy, addressed optimistically to Mr. Raymond Perkins, London. And so, with the church's permission, the yard at the back of the Scout Hall was turned into a shipwrights, as the Fourth commenced the biggest construction project it had ever undertaken.
I think Keith's father worked out on the back of a cigarette packet and worked from that. He was an ex-chief petty officer in the Navy, had a great knowledge of small boats and just designed something which he thought would be right. He was in fact looking for a workhorse for the group. It got a little bit more grandiose than that, and it finished up looking more like a police launch than a workboat.
Now Venture Spirit, as she was to be called, had always been a snug fit at the back of Pretoria Road, so it was with some nervousness that the group prepared for the boat's departure and eventual launch at Putney.
The church authorities were most concerned that the boat would slip out of the cradle and smash the church hall to pieces, which it quite easily could have done. We also had the assistance of some charming sea rangers who also helped us move the boat out. I'm sure that persuaded the Ventures to come along and give up a weekend knowing that the sea rangers were there.
On the river, Venture Spirit quickly proved her worth. A motor training vessel, a workboat fetching and carrying, a friendly tow for weary rowers. Venture Spirit cruised the Thames Tideway for 10 years, a tribute to Jim Riddle's ingenuity and craftsmanship. But eventually her thin steel skin became too fragile. In the late 70s, her engine was removed and the hull scrapped. The old lifeboat which gave so many youngsters an introduction to cruising. But hey, what else was going on?
Think of your fellow man, lend him a helping hand, put a little love in your heart. You see it's getting late, oh please don't hesitate, put a little love in your heart, and the world will be a better place, and the world will be a better place for you and me. Here, just wait and see. Another day goes by.
Ever topical in its approach to scouting, the district kept half an eye on what the boys were watching on telly. And one of the most popular shows in the 70s was It's a Knockout, a zany collection of team games with the emphasis on getting plastered rather than winning. So why not pick a day in midsummer and take over Streatham Common?
Anybody could go in for it, not just the kids, but the people, and just pay a few coppers. And at the end of the day, it helped to pay for everything. And it was just wonderful, you know, the dafter you could think of the things to do, the better. And the parents used to come and the public used to come, because it's right at the bottom of Streatham Common. It had all the feed from the shoppers and that opposite. I knew it was a fantastic day, and the weather was so kind to us. I don't ever remember it raining.
Chick's films capture the spirit of a youth movement unencumbered by modern-day regulations. He recorded the start of the group's link with the London Sailing Project, the ultimate test in seamanship for young people from all backgrounds. A programme that isn't challenging has little appeal to youngsters of this age. These offshore adventures carried the appearance of risk while actually being managed by experienced and self-confident leaders, Chick himself among them. And that's about it really. I hope you enjoyed looking at the pictures as much as I enjoyed being part of the fourth. Let's finish with one of Chick Wright's favourite visual jokes, suitable for all occasions.